Okay, so last, children. Well, this is an easy one, right? What do we call children? We refer to them as a bundle of joy. And if you look at the data are very, very clear. People with children are much less happy than people with them. Now, this is an accumulation. I want you to know this is not a study I did in my lab. We're talking about Great Britain panel survey. We're talking about almost all of the data economists and sociologists have plowed through in America, Canada, Western Europe over the last 25 years. In study after study, you see that either children have no effect or they have a small negative effect. I do not know of a single study showing that people with children are happier than people without them. Now, one possibility you might say is, but maybe happy people just don't have kids, right? People who are really just so delighted with life and themselves, they go off and they play. And so it might be that people are sorting themselves into these categories based on their happiness. Well, first of all, wouldn't it be a little odd that they choose to be parents, but they're more miserable when their children are little than when they're big? Those are both groups of people. But anyway, here's the way you test that hypothesis. You look at longitudinal data. Here are longitudinal data. These are the same people followed over time before and after the birth of their child. Now, just to give my mom a moment, here's what she predicts. My mom says, you go along in life, it's fine, and then you have a child like you, and everything's better, and it stays better. Was my mom right? Well, my mom sure was right about some of it until she was wrong. Those are what longitudinal data on happiness look like. People are pretty happy, and they really look forward to the baby, and then the baby comes, and happiness plummets. I'll give you just one more piece of data because I know these are hard data to believe. This is a study published about 2 years ago in Science, the very best scientific journal in the world, published by a Nobel laureate. And in this study, about 1,000 women are followed around electronically as they go about their day, and the researchers collect 2 pieces of data. One, how happy are they at different moments in their day? And 2, what are they doing? And this allows the researchers to say, how happy are women when they're doing this, and how happy are they when they're doing that? And here's some of the things that women are doing when they report being very happy when they happen to be talking to their friends or they happen to be eating. Okay, sources of pleasure. Here, they're less happy when they're grocery shopping and really not very happy when they're doing housework. So this is the question. How happy are they when they're with their children? Well, it turns out that they're pretty about somewhere near vacuuming. That's right. That's right. They are less happy when they're with their kids in any shape, way, or form than when they're shopping for groceries. Okay. Now, we laugh. I see you're amused by this, but I know in your heart of hearts you don't believe it. Because most of you are parents and you are thinking to yourself, my children are my greatest source of joy. And so before I totally explode your myth, I just want to go on record as saying, I am related to this other bald-looking guy here. That is my son. He is one of my greatest sources of joy. And I only say one of because now I've got 2 grandchildren who are even greater sources of joy because they're twice as cute and much less work for me. I don't hate kids. I love kids. I have a kid. But what we know is that science asks us to believe things that conflict with our intuition, right? I don't see a black hole. I cannot see gravity. What are you talking about, germs? Show me germs. Science tells us that sometimes our eyes fool us and our intuitions are wrong. When science gives you data that says your intuitions are wrong, you don't say, well, let's find some data that support my intuitions. You say, if you worked in the Bush administration, that is what you do. But otherwise you say, how can I make sense of the fact that the data tell me a truth about the world that doesn't seem to be the way it feels? I think it is incumbent on us not just to say, children don't seem to be a source of happiness, but to explain why every one of us thinks that's just absurd. I have 3 hypotheses about why we all believe something that data suggests are wrong. This is the view these data I've given you are the view of happiness from outer space. Here's my 3 answers. I think that the reason we all believe that children are a great source of happiness when the data say otherwise are Armani socks, heroin, and baseball. Let me explain. Armani socks. Now, I don't know if anyone here, this is actually a crowd where we might have somebody wearing Armani socks, so forgive me if you're that person, but if you were to go buy a pair of Armani socks, almost surely sometime in the next 2 weeks you will be telling somebody how great they are. You go, oh my God, I know they're $250 a pair, but you've never walked on a cloud like you walk on with these things. I feel like dancing. I feel like skipping. You will be telling others how great they are. Now, it could be because Armani socks are great. But it could be because you just paid a lot of money for them. That's right. Basic law of economics, we pay a lot of money when things are valuable. Basic law of psychology, we value things a lot when we pay a lot of money for them. The more we pay for them, the more we value them. The more people suffer for anything, the more valuable it is, the more they love it. Gee, what does that sound like? Yes, it sounds like raising children. We give them our hearts. We give them our blood, our sweat, and our tears. What kinds of morons would we be if they weren't making us happy? Of course they must make me happy. Why would I be doing this, giving up all that other stuff if they weren't? One reason I think we believe that our children are a great source of happiness and joy is that we'd be very foolish to have had them, we think, if they aren't. Second, heroin. Now, everybody knows that heroin is a great source of human misery. Wrong, it isn't. Heroin is actually a great source of joy. Anybody ever had a narcotic? Surely you've, probably not illegally, but you've been in the hospital, right? The lumbar went out and they gave you the morphine and you went, never let it stop, God. Yes, that's because heroin is actually a huge source of pleasure and joy. The reason it creates human misery isn't because heroin makes you feel bad. It's because it makes you feel so good that you give up every other source of pleasure. You stop washing, bathing, brushing your teeth. You don't go to work. You give up your family. You just basically walk around trying to get more heroin. The problem with heroin isn't it makes you feel sad. It's that it makes you feel so good that it crowds out every other source of joy and thereby lowers your average happiness. What does that sound like? Yes, it sounds like children. It's not that children are, when you see your child, you think, I'm not having a good time. It's that children require so much, particularly at certain points in their life cycle, that they crowd out all the other pleasures. Yes, I've got a baby. I no longer have sex with my spouse. I don't see a play. I don't go to a restaurant. I can barely find time to, and you name it. So when people say, Professor Gilbert, you don't know what you're talking about. My child's my greatest source of joy. I say, yes, when you have one, it's your greatest. That's right. And that's what parenthood is. Okay. It's not, I guess what I'm saying is that even if the company of a child was nothing but a joy, they require so much company. That's really the point. Okay. Third, I want to make one more point about heroin. So I say that, I've said that they crowd out other sources of joy. I already showed you marriage is a huge source of happiness in people's lives. This is marital satisfaction over the lifespan. You're looking at thousands of data points. This is a very typical finding. People start out getting married and they're happy because that's why they got married in the first place. And then it basically just goes to hell. And marital happiness goes down, 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 down as they have children, as the children are growing up. And then it starts to recover. Why? Well, if you could get close enough to that slide, you'd see the children are leaving home. My father is a biologist, and he's always asked as a biologist, whenever he discusses the issue of human abortion, he's asked, Professor Gilbert, when does life really begin? And he says, when the dog dies and the kids leave home. That's his standard joke. But actually, I don't know about the dog dying, but it turns out to be true of the children leaving. People report some of the greatest happiness in their life when they're empty. The only known symptom of empty nest syndrome was made up by journalists. Right? It's not a DSM category. The only known symptom is smiling. People are going, yeah, the kids are out. Yeah, it's really rough. Yeah. Okay. I should say, though, there's a little bit of controversy about this line. Some data don't show as much recovery as this. Sorry. Okay. Yes, so they crowd out. Okay, the last point I wanted to make was about baseball. So I grew up in Chicago. I'm a big Cubs fan. I live in Boston. I love the Red Sox. And if I were to go watch the Red Sox play the Yankees, and it was a no-hitter, and then in the bottom of the ninth, Euclid comes to bat and hits a home run, and we win the game against those bastards. If you asked me, how was that game, I would say it was amazing. That actually isn't right. A no-hitter is like watching grass grow. It's the most boring thing you can do in a baseball park. You will be eating hot dogs and reading the schedule backwards. The reason I will think this was an amazing game is because it had an amazing moment. And it turns out when you do research on human memory, people remember episodes by peak moments. What I'm remembering is that fantastic 30 seconds of the game, and I'm forgetting the 3 hours of hell. What does that sound like? Yes, that's a day with a 5-year-old, isn't it? No, not yet, not now. We'll be there soon. I already told you don't hit your brother. And then, just when you think, there's no hits, just when the 4-year-old looks up and goes, I love you, Daddy. Home run of the heart. A transcendent moment that when you look back on it and you're tucking them in and go, wasn't it a great day? No, actually, if a psychologist had been following you, they'd say, you had 30 really good seconds. The rest was not so good. You can't really call that a good day, but memory's a wonderful thing. So, in a sense, children may not make us happy often, but when they make us happy, they may give us a transcendent kind of happiness that almost acts as an amnestic, right? It almost wipes out our memory for all the moments of drudgery. That's the view of happiness from outer space. That's what we know from looking at data on human beings. Now, if my mom were here, first of all, she would have left long ago. But if I gave her a chance, I said, Mom, ask some questions, she would have said a few things. First, she would have said, okay, Mr. Smarty Pants, if having them is bad, let me tell you this, not having them is worse. My mom might be right. The data don't rule out this possibility. Here are data I showed you I showed you this curve. These are real people building up to having a baby, and then they have it and their happiness goes down. But it might be, and we don't have these kinds of data, here are hypothetical people who wanted kids but didn't get them. It might be that they're less happy. Yes, it might be children or hard work, but we all want them. By and large, almost everybody does. And they take a little of the joy out of life, but not getting them would be worse. Nothing I've said is a prescription that says, I guess I shouldn't have kids, because we don't know what that yellow line really looks like. My mother also would have reminded us that if children don't make you happy, it might be your fault, not theirs, right? It's easy to hear these data and go, wow, little shitheads. I wonder, why did I even, right? Maybe they are great potential sources of joy, and as parents, we somehow screw it up. We somehow don't get all the joy out of them that we might. Remember what the economist said about dollars. If they're not making you happy, you're spending it wrong. Well, maybe if your children aren't making you happy, you're parenting them wrong. Maybe you're doing things like you're way up on that dollar curve and you're chasing a few more instead of spending time with kids in a way that actually could bring you satisfaction. And it sounds a little bit like I'm preaching here. We don't know if that's true, but my mom could be right that it's potentially true. Finally, my mother would say, life is about more than happiness. Now, we could have a long discussion about this. I actually think she's wrong. I don't think it's about more than happiness. I think that's exactly what it's about. But here's the point. Science can't tell us whether life should be or shouldn't be about happiness. That's not a factual question. That's a moral question. Maybe the fact that children don't make us happy and that we have them anyway says something wonderful about it. Maybe that's actually our most noble trait, that we're willing to sacrifice a little of our happiness to do something that we think brings meaning.